afternoon to you. Well, as we go into the local elections, you will have seen our team of reporters showing you so many of the problems in local government. You'll have seen Tamala Cloudy sewage works that don't work, taps with no water, potholes, broken traffic light, areas of town without electricity for months on end. The problems go on and on. Why and how has this happened? Where do the problems start? One person who may have an important, perhaps unique insight into this is the former city manager of the city of Johannesburg, Trevor Fowler. He's now an adjunct professor at the Wits School of Governance. Professor Fowler, good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming in. It's an important day to have a mass event tonight with Bafana. It's an important day to have a live guest in the studio.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
The big problem really seems when it comes to the governance and councils, it seems to be about money. Maybe that's just because we can quantify it, but everywhere you go, and I think the public perception is that money is misspent, it's not spent at all, and that's also because of the Auditor General's reports that we would see. Is that the right place to start, the way councils manage money?
Yes, I would agree that money is a very important issue, because there is a mismatch between when the income comes in and the expenditure happens. So the income is seasonal, when in winter there would be use of more electricity, summer use of water, so there are different seasons for the supply of different services, and the income also differs. So after the new year, in January, people don't have money, but you still have to pay salaries. And so that's one of the key issues, is really to look at how you manage the finances, but in particular, how you manage the cash that comes in.
Why do councils fail to manage money? I mean, look, I battle to manage my own money sometimes, but a council will know, that this is what's going to happen on a seasonal basis. Is there a skills shortage? Are people who manage money just not available for councils? Is the private sector paying them higher salaries? Or, and I do have to bring this up quite early in the conversation, is there, corruption in some cases?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. First of all, when I was city manager of Joburg, it took us a year to get a CFO. And you needed a CA, somebody with a chartered accountant, and they had to have the skill to be able to manage it. And of course, the big difficulty is that there is corruption, but you have to focus on the service delivery, and you have to also deal with the corruption. When I came to Joburg, they had they borrowed 3.4 billion during the course of the year to pay salaries. And one of the things I introduced was really getting a daily cash report. So personally, I would get a report that said, this is the amount of cash we collected. And in Joburg, phenomenally, it's 130 million every day. Or it was then. It's more now. And you have to keep track of that. And I think some of the simple things are not done because people tend to look at it from an accounting perspective, when in fact it's managing the cash flow, it's managing your surplus, managing all of those things.
I would think if anyone wanted to run the finances of a city, Joburg would be the one. I know Cape Town will make a case for it. But Joburg, and could also afford a salary. It still took you a year to find a person. That would mean that Makanda has no chance.
Well, the smaller municipalities, of course, have different kinds of problems. Joburg, if you're able to collect the money, you would have sufficient money to at least run the services and address some of the backlogs. In the smaller municipalities, one of the difficulties is that they don't necessarily have the capacity. So if you take Amatole municipality, for instance, which is a district municipality, because the local municipalities don't have the capacity, the district municipality delivers the water, the electricity, and many of the other services. Yet those are local functions. And because of capacity, they are the ones that did it. Now, during COVID, they had a cash flow problem, and they were unable to pay salaries. And the reason they have a cash flow, because districts are not really designed to do the basic services. They are designed to support services. But if there's no capacity, they have to step in and do it. And so that's one of the key challenges that you have.
It's not just about financial skills that you need. You need a city engineer. You need someone who understands electricity provision. You need someone who can get water from place to place. You talk about the smaller municipalities. They don't seem to have the capacity to do that either.
Yes, well, of course, there are many, many skills required. So the engineering is one, and one of the big areas for losses is really when projects are not completed and they're not done on time, and as a consequence you've got to pay and they haven't delivered in the same capacity because they don't have the ability to procure the right services at the right cost. And I think that's one of the key things. When you look at the construction industry, which in South Africa is quite developed, it's changed a bit in the last 2 years, 3 years or so, but it is quite developed. And when you're looking at a big company so for instance, Murray & Roberts, which is about the size of Johannesburg, when they put in a tender, they have worked out the cash flow. People in the municipalities don't know anything about how to manage, how to look at the cash on a project, etc. And they just say, oh, well, this one is the lowest. It may seem to be the lowest, but it's not necessarily the lowest if you look at the cash flow.
And I mean, tied to that, I forget the figure, but I think it's a third, 20% more than that of councillors were not able to get a matric. So then when they sit on committees that go through these documents, they're not necessarily able to provide the proper oversight either.
And the other difficulty is, besides not doing the oversight, because they don't necessarily have the skills, they change every 5 years. So over 50%, I believe, this time around, people are changing because there are new people coming in, because it's a highly competitive position, being a councillor. So people try their best, because of our party system, they find ways to get rid of the people that are there, the incumbents.
Did areas have the capacity and lose it? Or did they never have the capacity, but it didn't matter, and now the population's grown to the point where the lack of a capacity has become apparent? Or has something else happened?
Well, I think there are two things. I mean, if you look over the period of the last 27 years or so, since democracy, the initial change was that services were really delivered to a small minority. After that, you had to build the capacity, and you had to build the skills. But I think in the last the decade following 2009, a lot of skills were lost in the government and replaced with people who don't necessarily have the skills that are required. And some of them are straightforward skills. So even people come with degrees, if they haven't been schooled in how to manage implementation, it doesn't matter if you have a degree if you can't implement. You're still unskilled. And so I think that's one of the areas that certainly at the Wits School of Governance we try to look at and try to say, give people the practical side of things, doing case studies, etc.
We need to talk about something which may be a little bit uncomfortable for you because of the movement that you come from, but there seems to be a big difference between the councils run by the ANC and the councils run by the DA. And you see the difference in the Western Cape. The Auditor General confirms this, and I think we can accept the Auditor General gives an objective viewpoint. Does this point to a political problem? Or, I mean, I realize, and I must take into account the Western Cape has sort of regional differences because it has a slightly different history at the same time during apartheid. So is there a problem of politics? Is there something else going on? I mean, why would it be that some councils seem to continually fail and some seem to continually succeed?
Well, I think one is that it's really about the numbers that you have. So the DA has smaller numbers, and they generally have people who are quite skilled because many of them come from areas that are privileged.
Yeah, they come from richer places.
Richer places. And people in the poorer areas don't have the skills. And because the turnover is so great, there's no sustainability. So that, I think, is one of the big major problems. So the other question, of course, is also corruption, which is don't think is a complete government problem. It's a societal problem. And where you've got greater numbers, you will have a greater percentage of people that maybe don't understand that certain things are unethical, certain things are corrupt, and carry out those practices. So I think that's one of the key reasons for the failure. I mean, if you look at just the income, if you take a municipality, say a metro, 35% of the households bring in 70% of the income. And so you have to figure out how you're going to manage keeping 35% of the households happy so that they will pay for their services, so that you can subsidize the services that needed to go to areas that have been neglected over the years. And that, I think, is one of the big management issues, which I think both the DA and the ANC struggle with, because there are complaints in many areas. But if you get the technical sides right, you can at least have the money, but you can also misspend it. So I think that's a key challenge in making that balance between how do you keep people happy, that so they continue to pay, and then you have more money to subsidize. And then you have to provide services there. So how do you not over-service this area because you just want the money? So it's a real balancing act in that regard.
I mean, there's a real risk with this model. I mean, morally it's correct, of course, a redistributive model, but is that richer people are going to pull out of government services wherever they can. They've done it with schools, they do it with private security. They're not doing it with water, but they are trying to do it with electricity, and electricity really matters to revenue. So the risk is that 35% of people who are paying 70% of the revenue will just stop paying, or pay a lot less.
Yeah, well, that's the big challenge, because there are, I mean, if you go to a country like India, there are entire areas that are completely self-serviced. They don't get services from the state. They are self-serviced, and we wouldn't want to go that route. I mean, because that really will take us down a destructive road. And I think that balance between the morality of ensuring that people who have been excluded for many years, and particularly those households which are headed by black women, and there's problems of patriarchy and all of that, how do you address that and yet get that income? So it is quite a challenge, and I think it's one of the big things that when leaders come into municipalities don't quite get that that's what you have to do, and particularly political leaders, because they want to work for their constituency and don't realize that if you just work for your constituency, you won't have the money to pay for the service.
Sure. I've never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
We've got 5 years to the next election. We've got a district development model coming in. Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the cooperative governance minister, is pushing that. 5 years' time, and Newzroom Afrika's report is still going to be showing us all of these pictures of service delivery problems. Or is it going to get better?
Well, it's a very difficult question.
Not a big yes.
It's a difficult question, because I think the challenge we've got to face, and there are some signs which are real problematic that are happening in the country. So if all of the parties don't understand that it's in the interests of everybody to have all people serviced, if you don't, your life is going to be more dangerous, because people are going to protest, etc., and we'll have more situations that happened in Phoenix, etc. And if you don't understand that if you bring a situation that you've got different forces fighting each other, you won't get a change. And I think that's one of the big dangers of this election, if you look at what's happened, is that you've got to get cooperation to ensure that we function effectively as a society.
Such an important point, Professor Trevor Fowler. Nice to talk to you. It's been a very long time. Thank you. Professor Fowler is an adjunct professor at the Wits School of Governance, and I suppose I should mention, I don't think he'll mind, a former city manager at the city of Joburg. Professor, thank you.